I want to welcome you all to yet another Centili Elevate session. I'm truly glad that we're back with the Elevate series, and especially today I'm very happy to be hosting Sam Barker of Juniper Research with us. So hi Sam, and welcome from our side, a big welcome and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Sam Barker is the head of analytics and forecasting at Juniper Research, and he's a true expert on telco, IoT, and digital media. And as you all know, Juniper Research is one of the leading analyst firms in this space, in the mobile and digital arena. And we all turn to them for some research, for forecasting, spotting trends, and even consulting. And what they specifically focus on and what they specialize in is really observing and identifying the high growth sectors of the market. And this is why I think today's session will be very relevant for all of us, and we can all derive some very useful takeaways from what Sam will be sharing. Today, Sam will be talking about the disruption in digital content. Digital content in itself is a topic very relevant for anyone in this ecosystem, but really there are some changes that are maybe intensified due to COVID and the recent pandemic that has struck. So I think it will be very relevant and useful for anyone. And no matter what your role is in the ecosystem or what your company's position is in this game, I'm sure all of us will have something to take away today. So specifically, Sam will share with us several things. So he will be talking about the emerging trends, some of the patterns that I have observed in recent times. He'll also be showing and identifying some new sources of growth and actually helping us see where the new growth might come from in the future. And more importantly, he'll be helping us see if and how can we quantify the opportunity. So I'm sure the session today will be more than useful and very credible and relevant. And we really want to make it as useful as possible. So this is why we want to invite you to really make this interactive, not just to have a presentation. So please feel free to join in any form you like. You can ask your questions, you can post a comment, leave some thoughts, share your dilemmas with Sam, if maybe he can help with some of the thoughts and dilemmas you have. And we've left quite enough time at the end for the Q&A session. So if you're shy, just type your questions in the Q&A section at the bar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read them out at the end and invite Sam for a discussion on the topics, or just raise your hand if that's easier, and then you can join live and ask Sam a direct question and join the discussion. That might also be a good option. But please do join, it's vital for everyone, and I'm sure your questions will be useful to more people. So Sam, welcome once again. It's great to have you, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Dina. Yeah, I'll start just by going through the agenda really quickly for today. So obviously we are looking at digital content. We're looking at the future outlook, what the digital content market will look like, what sorts of monetization models are out there, what sorts of ways there are of making money. We'll also be looking at how our research shows that users are using digital content, what sorts of devices are out there, including the spend over established devices, as well as the emerging areas as well. One trend we sort of noticed over the last little bit is a consolidation of digital content, and we'll be going through that, and that's making the market more competitive. We'll also be touching on the use case for carrier billing, which moves us nicely into the subscription-based services for digital content. And we'll also be looking at the role of advertising. The last slide, probably the one that's going to be most interesting, is what we've identified as the emerging areas of digital content. We'll be looking at 5 or 6 different areas we think are set for a bit more growth, and what our trends will be for our predictions. Sorry, for those areas. So just diving straight in, we'll just have a quick look at the future outlook for digital content. What we've done here is we've just shown it on the right 3 big areas: videos, music, and digital games. Digital video includes streaming. Digital music includes obviously music streaming services, and then digital games includes not only the high rated, the AAA rated video games, as well as mobile apps and the apps that can go across smartphones and tablets. Obviously for video streaming, video on demand has been a big area for digital content. As Dina said, we were looking at the impacts of COVID-19, and video on demand is certainly one that witnessed a rapid rise in revenue and adoption owing to lockdowns and social distancing and stay-at-home orders in multiple countries. So companies like Netflix, Amazon, who own Prime Video, and Hulu in the US, certainly saw more uptake of their services. And then obviously there's advertising-based video. During the pandemic, it was interesting because when the pandemic hit and marketing budgets were basically being reviewed, people worried about economic impacts and less spending from consumers. These marketing budgets were reduced quite rapidly, and demand for advertising media over certain platforms was something that we saw driving down the CPMs of advertising, essentially the cost of placing an ad on a digital platform, whether that be video or online browsing or in-app itself, which was something that is beginning to recover. And obviously music subscription services within music has been a really big trend over the last few years. Obviously, the legal issues and who owns the rights to the music is still quite contentious. But we're moving away now from the paper download and owning physical copies of music as well is something that we saw happen quite a while ago. It became digital, and now it's moving towards subscription services where you pay a flat monthly fee for access. And digital games is a similar thing. You have things like Microsoft Xbox Game Pass and other streaming services, Google Stadia, where you pay a flat monthly fee for access to digital games and the videos and the subscription service can have. So just looking at the total market value for through to 2026, that's going to reach 432 billion, rising from 211 billion, which we estimate to happen at the end of this year. Obviously, that's quite a substantial growth. Moving forward, we'll go through this in a bit more detail with different monetization models on being offered, but the growth is quite staggering. Just to put it into context, you're looking similar revenues to advertising spend, which is one of the biggest digital markets in the world. Just very quickly, you touched on it before, the COVID-19 accelerating digital content services. It's something that did happen in many markets. From our research, when we've been tracking different revenue from different service providers across multiple markets, digital content is one we've noticed where that acceleration, even though it may have slowed, is something that is giving momentum to the market. Digital content itself obviously is in a way infinitely scalable. The only thing that will limit the output of digital content itself is server space, the ability for a network to handle the traffic. So infinitely scalable from a digital content creator's point of view. It's a market with a high return on investment. And obviously the number of users continues to grow. Again, we'll go through this in a bit more detail later on, but the different platforms and different devices that users can access to that users can use to access digital content, and that continues to grow, and it's creating almost sub-markets within digital content itself for niche players to come in and disrupt what's going on. And we'll just have a quick look at the monetizing the digital content. There are four key strategies for monetizing it: subscription-based modeling, content purchases, advertising, and in-app purchases. Just a bit of clarity: the difference between content purchases and in-app purchases is that a content purchase, for example, would be purchasing the right to use the content outright. On in-app purchases, you essentially something along the lines of a freemium model, where you're given a platform for free, like an app, and then you can buy content within it. So we'll go through subscriptions in more detail. It's certainly an area we find is going to have a bigger impact over the next few years. But it's becoming increasingly popular, and we're seeing the emergence of recurring payment services. These guys who you can more easily track your cash flow and your spend, as well as making a flat fee for users. Again, making more strategies along the lines of content libraries, and we're seeing a few market movements in that. Again, with content purchases, this is one that's on the decline. Legal ownership issues and sometimes a lack of physical copy of the content is something that can put a lot of users off, dissuade a lot of users from moving through that. Advertising, as you can see to the right, is by far the most popular monetization model. Allows the user to explore the content with no cost to the end user. Obviously, a big user of that model is obviously YouTube for digital video. They obviously do offer their subscription services that allow users to watch ad-free versions of the platform. But again, the majority of users are still using the advertising-based platform. So it's about offering different choices to the end user. And in-app purchases, as I mentioned, leveraging the freemium model, it still remains popular, especially amongst app developers who are well established. The advertising model is one for the maybe less established content creators, app developers. Obviously, the big issue in the mobile app market is attrition. With the majority of users deleting an app after 3 months, in most cases, is something that means that retaining usage for an app is a big issue. And to get around that, quite a lot of app developers are launching an app, for quick return on investment by using the advertising model. And just to quickly go over the digital content consumption devices, we've identified a few here. Smartphones obviously are going to be the majority of the spend that we're expecting by 2026. In developed regions, Europe, North America, some places in the Asia Pacific, smartphone usage is very, very high. The majority of users have it. We anticipate that 60% of global spend will be happening over smartphones. One of the big drivers of that has been the development of the app ecosystem, the ability for trusted payments, for users to trust these app platforms with payment details, the ability to quickly download not only the app but updates, as well as faster mobile internet connections. 4G, recently 5G has meant that a lot of users are now moving their work and their processes and using smartphones as their primary device rather than a laptop or a PC. Also it's very applicable to card payments, digital wallets, and carrier billing. All very a frictionless process over the smartphone these days, with things like GPay and Apple Pay as well. I think one of the main things that we've seen over smartphones over the last 2 years or so is this development of immersive reality capabilities. If you have a look at what dedicated immersive reality devices are like, firstly they're quite expensive and the content's not there. There's not enough content in the content libraries to justify a user making that big acquisition. And one of the things that sort of happened over recently is you're seeing almost like a chicken and egg game. You have the devices that are not able to, they don't have the content library, so people don't really want to invest in them. And then you've got the content creators for immersive reality who don't really see people investing in the devices, so they feel that there's no return on investment from their content. And it's sort of a market that's failing to take off continually. One thing we've seen over the last a year or so is that there's certainly been more increased investment from smartphone vendors themselves to make sure that immersive reality content can be played over their devices. It's almost becoming a case of these smartphone vendors are believing that they will start competing on the ability of their smartphones to handle this immersive reality content. You've recently seen announcements from companies like Meta, formerly Facebook, who are very keen to promote this idea of the metaverse and immersive reality. They own Oculus, obviously, would be a big part of that. And just moving on, tablets are in a similar position. They're not as mobile, they're not as they're more static than smartphones. You normally use them in a single location. So the development that you've seen over smartphones for immersive reality is certainly something that we've not really seen to the same degree as smartphones. But again, it's not as if these tablets are not used for digital content. Obviously, they have a bigger screen, they're suitable for video. They're becoming more and more used in a consumer environment. I will say that from our forecast and our research, we are seeing tablet ownership go down slightly, mainly because they're being used more for family units, and you're less in a commercial environment. What you're seeing is people migrate these services to phones. And obviously tablets, counting for 62 billion is certainly not a small figure. And PCs and laptops, these tablets, PCs and laptops are still going to remain a very prevalent device in digital content and moving forward. Obviously, as I said, similar to tablets, PCs and laptops can be more used as a business device rather than a personal device. People are starting to use smartphones more and more. They're more processing power in the smartphones, slightly bigger screens, better ecosystem and OSs that support what users need. And the last one that we sort of want to point out is smart TVs, or the connected TV. These guys are the ones that we're seeing OS vendors and from TVs integrate more and more apps that allow you to directly play media through the TV. You have TVOD, transactional video on demand, as well as FVOD, free video on demand. These apps are sort of being installed directly into the OS of the TV, which means that you don't have to buy additional hardware. And it's becoming more and more a case of which TVs can access the most content without having this additional hardware, and it's becoming an area in which these guys compete. Now, the good thing, because of the rise of the internet, that these guys are able to update their software quite rapidly. So when it comes to in the future, we'll talk about the consolidation of content and what that means for the content providers. What does that mean for the smart TV vendors moving forward? It means that they can quite easily capitalize on it. And the other one, which is probably the more interesting, maybe not as much spend at the moment, but other devices. We've done together immersive reality and smart speakers. It's interesting with immersive reality because firstly, obviously, it's new, it's exciting that these guys, quite a lot of people still haven't experienced it. Now, what was probably the most important thing to notice is that with immersive reality is that the app ecosystem is also mirroring the smartphone and tablet ecosystem at the moment. We need the same level of content distribution that can increase the content creation. The more content there is, the more value there is in purchasing the device. Smart speakers, on the other hand, are a slightly different story, and moving forward, what we're expecting to happen is more siloed ecosystems. So, for example, over Android on the smartphone or a tablet, obviously Google are the company that are developing this app store, and they regulate it, and they're the ones that update it. Smart speakers, as I said, a bit more siloed. I think it's going to be based on not OS vendors, but smart speaker vendors themselves. Obviously, you have Amazon, who owns the Echo and Alexa, as well as Google, who owns Google Home. When it comes to monetizing digital content over smart speakers, it's a bit more difficult. If you're a content creator, you're going to have to go to each of these individual apps, where if you want to do the same thing for a smartphone or tablet, it's essentially going to the Apple Store or the Play Store, and that's just two. So maybe we feel that over the next couple of years that the content over smart speakers is not going to be as high growth as others. And yeah, just quickly moving on to the consolidation of digital content. One of the things that we're seeing, it seems to be a case of companies are consolidating the digital content. They want this idea of competing on content itself. Over the last few years, it's really not nothing new that obviously that these streaming platforms or games platforms want to increase their content libraries. But I think now it's becoming, this is accelerated mainly due to the pandemic, that you're seeing quite a few acquisitions of these companies, mainly even due to content. You have a bigger player that will want to acquire a content library and immediately add it in to boost the value of their own platform. And, the competition between a streaming platform like Netflix or Hulu or Prime Video is who has the most content. Pricing is very, very similar. It's a bit different for Amazon, as they're what we call a multi-service subscription, because you get Prime Video through access to other features, which is something that Amazon's done very, very well. But yeah, moving forward, moving away from the video, you might look at the games market, which is a bit newer. You're seeing, guys, these games platforms just acquire companies just to add their video games to their own content to their subscribers. And I think it's a case of in the games market, unlike the music market, is licensing out these games for the platform needs to be far more long term. You can't just license it out for 6 weeks, which is what some of the guys are doing, and they're not really seeing the success. So if you want to have user retention and make sure that users continue to do it, it's not only just about keeping your libraries as similar as they are, so people can come back to the same content, but it's continually adding it to refresh the content and to keep the user proposition of owning a subscription to your service more and more valuable as time progresses. And the other notion that we probably want to point out is that becoming saturated with users in some instances of digital content. It moves on to the emerging areas of digital content we'll talk about in a bit. But as you know, people can only have a certain number of video subscription services. 2 or 3 years ago, it was a case of there was maybe 2 or 3. Disney Plus came out, and there's some other services that have come out, in local regions. And the idea is that to access the same content, you need to have multiple subscriptions, so you're paying more for the same content essentially. These platforms have understood that that's exactly what's going on, and they've moved now towards the other way and consolidating the content to make sure that the content libraries are becoming more and more valuable. Yeah, and as I said, as it's becoming a strategy for an increasingly market, moving on from just the content libraries and becoming more a decision for consumers, differentiation is basically the one word I'd say that platforms are focusing on at the moment. I've just identified 3 very, very quickly here. Personalized content that's coming out. User consent issues handling data is limiting its applicability, but one of the things that we sort of expect to see is increasingly adding in AI to personalized content. One of the things that you probably will noticed is this idea that you can go to maybe a famous person or something along those lines and request something and pay for content. I think it will move away from that. I think that type of personalized content isn't scalable. So what you're going to see is you're going to see artificial intelligence to personalize content, very, very quickly, very, very rapidly. And the first area we expect that to happen is advertising. With advertising, the idea is that I'm sure everyone's been on a platform before with advertising, and over 2 or 3 months, you've seen essentially the same ads multiple times. It's not very relevant. Targeting for ads is a big thing for users. But moving forward, the idea that AI can generate more personalized ads, maybe put your name and your location or something like that, is something that we expect some companies to try and explore. There's a big issue with that. First of all, return on investment. If you're going to get return on investment into the artificial intelligence-based service that you need, then you need to start charging a higher cost per mil, CPM. And the other one is essentially not really encouraging users by having a random video pop up with their name and their location, or something that knows that who you are. It's probably something that we're going to see an exploration of. I will use a phrase, a flash in the pan. It's something that's not really going to take off in too much, to any significant degree, is what I would say. And obviously the idea is localized content. Again, it's a trend we've been seeing for the last couple of years, but we expect it to take off over the next 2 to 3 years. You saw it on the app Snapchat. You used to be able to tag where you are. Geo-pinning, those sorts of things is a good example of localized content. The users have the access to that. I think the idea is that moving forward, that you'll be able to localizing it more and more. The idea of local beacons, the idea that when you're within a certain distance, you can tag that is certainly something that we expect to happen over more and more apps. And the other one is obviously immersive content. smartphones and tablets, as I said, more capable of mixed reality. They're able to more quickly add in services that are, add in technologies into their smartphone, software and hardware that are better able to use mixed reality. Obviously, you've got issues with latency between the device and the user. You've also got tracking, and one of the big successes in AR has been the app Pokemon Go a few years ago. And if you've noticed, there's not really been anything that's even come close to that. So what we would call augmented reality is an enabling technology. AR by itself is probably not very interesting to the user, but if you can find the right use case and find the right target demographic, target audience, then you're looking at a monetization potential that is going to be significant. And you could probably say the same thing for personalized content and localized content. It's a case of what does that mean? How do you make the return on investment? And that moves us on to carrier billing. So one of the key things that DCB has is that it's a low friction payment option. We'll go very quickly onto the subscriptions and the subscription model in the future, but DCB itself, as you can see to the right, is what provides connects between the digital content service providers and the end users themselves. Carrier billing, it's becoming more and more, less and less of just a simple payment method, and more of a way for users to connect to a service provider and have more of an ongoing relationship between the content provider and the end user themselves. That opens it up to just more beyond the content purchase model, more towards things like maybe recurring revenue or subscription-based revenue or in-app purchases. Once the user has that trust in the carrier billing, moving forward, it's a lot easier. But there's still going to be friction. So one of the recommendations that we have as carrier billing improves is where the friction arises. Moving a couple of years ago, we were sort of looking at what the fees that the carrier billing service providers were taking versus some of its competitors like digital wallets, card payments, and it was much higher, which meant that the fees were higher, which meant it was more appealing to use a different form of payment methods. But carrier billing, is moving with the times. It is becoming more and more appealing. The one thing I will say is that the regional side of things for carrier billing is certainly something that we expect to have an impact on where digital content is paid for, how digital content is paid for. For example, in Europe, it's maybe not as popular in places like the Asia Pacific region, where carrier billing is far more popular. There's also different legislation regarding how much you can pay for carrier billing versus in other places where there's less limits, there's less limitations on what sort of industries carrier billing can be used for. So as I said, moving the collaboration between the different layers of the digital ecosystem, that means that this collaboration, this idea between looking at digital content service provider and the end user, the network operator, the payment provider, it's less becoming about a journey, as people seem to call it, and more between greater interaction and being able to settle transactions more swiftly and be able to have more open data between the carrier billing provider and the end users. And as you talk about carrier billing entering new markets, one of those is obviously we feel is applicable is digital content. Just quickly moving on to the subscription-based side of things. Subscriptions to digital content represent over 50% of total subscriptions. So one of the things we have been looking at is not just subscriptions to digital content, but we've also got things like subscriptions to food boxes and things like that in our report. But one of the things we have noticed is that the subscriptions to the digital stuff is far more applicable because essentially, as I said, it's infinitely scalable. We have 1.2 billion digital content subscriptions globally by 2025, and we expect that to rise to just under 2 billion. 1.2 billion content subscriptions globally this year, and we expect that to rise to just under 2 billion by 2025. You can see to the right there, we've got just a few of the growth over the next 4 years, and video games is something that we, as I said, we expect to grow very, very highly. The idea is that the video games for subscription services like Game Pass and Stadia are going to consolidate their growth. Digital music subscriptions, again, we're expecting subscriptions of digital music to go up. I think digital music is a very good example of what's going to happen in things like games and videos, because it's slightly more established. There's slightly less variation in what the content is. I do think that means there's less room for innovation, but what you can see is that you're essentially getting 3 or 4 large music subscriptions providers coming out, making the necessary agreements with the content creators. In this point, in this industry, it's music artists. And then you see a number of failed attempts from companies entering the market to try and disrupt it. I think as digital content comes into view, and you look at games and video subscriptions and digital spoken word, what you're sort of looking at here is markets that are a couple of years behind digital music. So we're looking at when you move forward, these guys need to consolidate their leading position in the market to make sure that users continue to use their services over their competitors by maintaining their content libraries and continuing to expand them. And then if you just look at sort of the subscription services and carrier billing, if you look at how well aligned those two are, it's very obvious that if you want to be paying for a subscription service over carrier billing, the fact that it's a payment that is constant recurring revenue, as well as almost certainly going to be the same price every month for a continued period. Essentially adding that to a mobile phone bill via carrier billing is something that's very, very applicable. The fact that the prices of using carrier billing are now coming down is certainly something that is making carrier billing for subscription services something far more desirable. Obviously, this is a recurring revenue model, which means that from a content creator's point of view or a platform's point of view, the fact that you're going to know to a rough degree how much money you're going to get in for the month based on how many users you have makes planning and expanding content libraries far easier. And I just want to quickly talk about the role of advertising, because it is a very big part of the the digital content ecosystem. In fact, it's a key driver of the market value. Let's quickly show you to the right. Obviously, firstly, 60% of digital content is going to be derived from advertising, and on global average, $67 of average ad spend per digital content user by 2026. I mean, it doesn't sound particularly high when you think about it, but when you think that quite a lot of this is coming from the brands and the enterprises themselves rather than the end user, it's essentially an additional revenue stream on top of what the user is paying themselves. I think creating an ecosystem users that all people can operate is something that is happening at the moment. Is moving towards that goal. Obviously, there isn't a standard across all digital formats. Obviously, online and mobile, as in PCs and desktops, as well as smartphones and tablets, do have this ecosystem where it's very, very easy for advertisers to advertise over digital content, as well as attribute the ad. I'll talk about that in a second. But unfortunately, at the moment, Apple has lowered the targeting abilities of the ad platform by removing their digital identity or allowing end users to stop sharing as much data as they normally would. And that's having a bit of an issue on the attribution of the ads. Essentially, an attribution of the ad is where you can attribute if when an ad was shown to a user, and if they make that purchase, regardless of whether they clicked on the ad, they can attribute that ad to an advertiser, which means that the advertiser then can get paid by the publisher can then get paid by the advertiser moving forward. And there's also the getting more and more complicated multi-touch attribution. You may be shown an ad 4 or 5 times before you make the purchase, and you have to attribute each one of those ads to a proportion of the ad revenue, so to speak. And the other issue that advertising is facing at the moment is ad fraud, the ability that it lowers the return on investment for content creators. It also sort of inflates the market value by having ad spend that actually doesn't provide any return on ad spend for the advertisers themselves. And also the biggest issue for advertising is that it diminishes the user experience. I mean, I think it goes without saying that moving forward, advertising over content is something that's not 100% desirable, but from monetization and return on investment perspective, it sometimes is the easiest option. And one thing we're seeing is, we expect to see over the next couple of years, advertising technology becoming increasingly integrated into the content itself. It's this idea of always being told things like, people want personalized ads. I'm not 100% sure it's true. It's more a case of advertising from a content point of view needs to become more subtle. If you hark back to the last few years, the idea that pop-up banners and things like that, advertising that get away the user experience, we've moved away from that now. You have the old ribbon banner, a few pop-up banners here and there, video pre-roll ads as they're called. It's something that we're moving away from. And you talk about the emerging forms of content, the immersive reality or smart speakers, for example. The idea that you could quite easily put an ad in one of those content, some content over one of those devices is something that is currently being explored at the moment. I think we're about 2 or 3 years away from that to have some form of ecosystem for advertising where you can attribute those ads and make it more viable for the content creators. But advertising is something that we expect to continue to rise in terms of advertising spend. Had a bit of a dip because of the COVID pandemic, but as marketing budgets have returned, advertising is certainly playing a bigger role. And just moving on to the last slide for the emerging areas of digital content. So one of the things that we sort of want to talk about is where these new areas are coming from. It may come from all sorts of different new technologies or a new channel or a new category, but these market growth the market growth over maybe just video or music or subscriptions or apps. It may come from one of these things, but I think as markets become more saturated, the majority of the growth is going to be coming from these. I think one of the big issues that content creators or content platforms or all market stakeholders, if I'm honest, are going to have is differentiating between long-term opportunities and flashes in the pan. If you think about a long-term opportunity, you may have something quite innovative and disruptive, but within 2 or 3 years, there's no long-term revenue opportunity for it. I know I've already mentioned the app before, but the app Pokemon Go, what we saw is 4 years ago now, is there was an extreme amount of adoption, and that actually translated into revenue for the app creator, which is something that's not always guaranteed in with adoption. But even now, even though there are still user numbers and there are still activities on the app, revenue is nowhere near what it used to be. So what we're seeing at the moment is these are what we need to differentiate between what's a flash in the pan and what's a long-term opportunity for growth. And I think that's down to strategy. So I'm just going to go through them one by one, starting at the top for production on demand. So this is the idea that you can go to anybody and have some personalized content that is done on demand. At the moment, I don't think the market is set for long-term growth. I think the biggest issue that we have at the moment is that, as I said, it's not infinitely scalable. So we need there needs to be some strategy for creating that. And obviously, I think the biggest one is artificial intelligence, machine learning. I think the next step for production on demand is this idea that someone will come in for a user for an app, and they'll a user of an app, and they will come and ask for some form of video or some form of image or content, and the idea is that AI will generate it for them very, very quickly. At the moment, I think the investment into artificial intelligence is quite high, and we're not going to see this happen very over the next 2 or 3 years. User-generated content, on the other hand, is something that we do have. I mean, if I'm being honest, it's a very broad term. But the idea is that with all these users having access to cameras and microphones and their own content and internet access to the internet, the idea is that users can generate their own content. Now we are looking at things like TikTok and social media, but I think moving away from that, you're going to be moving into moving into sectors along the lines of maybe audio, not just video, maybe longer term, something along the lines of podcasting. But if you take the app Clubhouse, for example, that's far more interactive. And that's where I think the next step of the user-generated content is. It's not going to be, one person saying, from a podcast point of view, one person speaking out to a number of other people with no interactive element, which is essentially what I'm doing now, if I'm being honest. But the idea is that you become more, not just user-generated content, but it's, interactive user-generated content. And from that point of view, what you're going to need is a platform for it. I think server space and processing power is something that's going to be the biggest hindrance. But having said being the biggest hindrance, it's not that much of a hindrance at all. It's about how you monetize user-generated content. And I think the way forward for that is subscription-based revenue. I don't think with user-generated content, an advertising ecosystem would be applicable. The next area is local content. I think local content by itself is pretty self-explanatory. We used to have things before where you could tag a geotagging, and you used to have local beacons that were part of the Internet of Things and those sorts of areas. I think revenue and monetization from local content is going to come from the enterprises themselves that are willing to advertise on a local basis. But again, the idea of setting up hardware and geotagging software and local beacons is a big hindrance for that. And the next one is esports, which has been around for a while. But what we're seeing, or we expect to see over the next couple of years, is a real revolution in where it's going to happen. So at the moment, esports is very much an online type of event, as in Twitch as a platform is very, very keen. But esports is becoming so popular now that we expect not just platforms like YouTube and Twitch to be streaming or broadcasting these events, but you'll see mainstream providers, maybe even Amazon or Hulu in the US, buying the rights to these esports events as if they were buying rights to normal sports events. That alignment between esports and live sports is becoming less and less blurred, and it will be the same sort of revenue model in terms of maybe a hybrid advertising and subscription-based model. And fitness and well-being is something that happened during the pandemic. I think this is a very good idea of sort of what's, in order to differentiate between what's a long-term opportunity and the flash in the pan is the modeling. I think you need to make sure that there's continued user value in any fitness and well-being service, digital subscription service. And moving forward, that'll be down to the service providers themselves, but a subscription-based model for that is very, very viable. And finally, edutainment. I'll just very, very quickly, merger of education and entertainment. Something, again, an impact from COVID-19, something that a lot of school children were obviously stuck at home, unable to go to school, and we ended up in a position where there was a lot more reliance on technology for educating young people. And quite a lot of the investment and the time and effort went into developing edutainment type software. And I think moving forward, it's a case of making sure that essentially the bill payer, which is going to be the parents in this instance, are able to find value in the edutainment service itself. So that's just sort of a quick overview of the sort of the 6 trends that we think we're gonna have and how they're going to impact the market that we went over. I think Dina is now's a good time for questions and answers.
Sure, Sam, thank you very much for the presentation. Thanks a lot. We do have some questions piling up, so I'll just head right to that, right? And people, please feel free to post further questions and or raise your hands, whatever is more convenient. So one of the first questions that came in is actually, Sam, do you anticipate some major consolidations of content creators in the coming year? Is there something you see on the horizon or expect to be happening?
when it comes to the specifics, I don't think I can really say too much, but yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that the content market actually has been consolidating is the legal issue. So someone will buy a right to a certain area of content, or a certain, for example, in video, maybe to a certain library that comes from a certain movie studio or something along those lines. And the issue is that it's sort of a case of you have to wait till that agreement is over before you can onboard that content onto your platforming streaming service. So it's sort of done 2 or 3 years in advance, or maybe not 2 or 3 years, maybe 1 or 2 years in advance. So you sort of seem to know what's going on with the consolidation, in the future. I think from a video standpoint, that's pretty established. I think we saw those going to happen. I think the interesting area is games, because there's a lot of independent, smaller developer studios that produce some really good content and that's valuable. Also, attrition rates for games is quite not as high as mobile apps, but can be quite high. So a 3-month playing period maybe, and that ends up with these streaming gaming platforms having to update their content far more regularly than the video streaming platform. So I think if there's going to be consolidation, the big announcement is going to come from digital games.
Interesting, thank you. And moving on to the topic of fraud, I don't know how much have you researched in general fraud in carrier billing and in subscriptions. So what are your kind of thoughts on the future of fraud? What will be happening going forward?
I mean, with any fraud, it's always very difficult to say how big a market is, because obviously you need to detect the fraud. But it's going to be a continual cat and mouse game where the fraud over, say, carrier billing, if you the fraudsters, the malicious players, as we sometimes call them, have to pay to try and evade detection for fraud, which means that the carrier billing, even though they're losing out, they also need to pay to detect the fraud. So it's a cat and mouse game where essentially what any carrier billing platforms need to do is they need to make it unviable for the fraudsters. They need to invest enough to make sure that it's more costly to actually be legitimate through carrier billing than it is to be fraudulent, because of the savings that they would have got through fraud is now less than it was to actually just to go through the normal methods, essentially.
And do you think fraud has been one of the key inhibitors for growth of DCB? You mentioned DCB as one of the payment methods with a great potential because of the growth of smartphones. What do you think were maybe the key challenges that it has not grown further so far, and what do you think will be the key drivers of its growth in the future?
That's a very, very good question. I wouldn't necessarily put it down to fraud. I think there's if you take a look at the fintech market in general, there's been a lot of innovation within that. 2 or 3 years ago, when Apple Pay and GPay were very, very new, you didn't have these guys coming in. Direct carrier billing has a few more stakeholders in the market, operators and payment providers, and I think the issue was that the fees that these guys were taking made it very difficult to compete transaction-wise with these new guys that were coming out. When it came to obviously DCB, one of the big issues is applicability. So when I was looking at the market, I was looking where DCB is already quite popular and seeing what the guys were doing over there. And you can see that they rapidly adjusted to what needed to be done to start competing with what these guys were doing in terms of disruption by lowering their fees quite quickly and going out and looking at specific services. And also, as I said, in carrier billing, one of the big things that these guys have is they're able to support the almost recurring revenue rather than just a one-off payment, which is something that Apple Pay and GPay aren't particularly good at.
Sure. And that brings me maybe to another topic that popped up in 2 different questions, which is bundling, right? Because DCB is very suitable to be combined and used for bundling. Centili were also quite bold and tried to work a lot with the MNOs to provide bundling opportunities. So what are your views on the business models for bundling in emerging markets versus the mature markets? And also from another question, how do you see it going forward with premium content providers? Do you see it better suited for them, for one-offs, as you mentioned, or recurring subscriptions? What are your general thoughts on that?
I think, when it comes to bundling, I think, obviously, a collection of services is something that is very, very appealing. But moving forward, when it comes to the sort of carrier billing and its applicability to premium content, it's a difficult one because you sort of have to remove yourself from you know, all market stakeholders and just look at it from the perspective of the platform. They will want to offer as many different choices as they can, and obviously that's up to the payment provider to be able to partner with them and be able to, you know, to help them with that, and then offering it to the subscriber. I mean, when it comes to the premium content side of things, I think in many developed regions it's been a case of card payments or digital wallets. I think the idea of premium content is normally been along the lines of offering it as through the operator directly, rather than from the brand of the enterprise that is offering the service itself. So it's a case of the operator partnering with the brand or enterprise. So when it comes to, you know, the premium aspect of it, I think what we're going to see is I think there's going to be more offerings, but I don't think it will come from the brands and enterprises. It will come directly from the operators. And you know, from the recurring revenue standpoint, being able to add it to your phone bill is something that, from the recurring side of it, with is probably integrating into the phone bill is more just as appealing as having it in any other payment method. So yeah, as I said, coming more from the operators themselves, but certainly some more uptake.
Sure. And there is another related question now that, you know, we mentioned operators. What do you think is the trend, or what do you think makes more sense for them? Because they all invest in digital content. They all too want to become DSPs, of course, and that's the growing source of monetization for them. So do you think they should try to invest to build their own content, or build their own content stores or game portals and etc.? Or do you think it's better to kind of outsource, partner, and kind of be quicker by partnering with different existing brands?
Yeah, operators and carriers historically have not been the most agile when it comes to technology. When it comes to things like their own games or apps portals, I mean, they tried that many years ago, and they just couldn't compete with Apple and Google when they started doing it themselves. They were far more agile. They were far more willing to invest in them. It was far more user friendly. Was probably the big reason that why these guys won out of the operators. I would be along the lines of partnering with these guys, offering DCB over other platforms, making sure, you know, it's well advertised, and yeah, again, it's about partnering. I think one of the big areas that we're going to see with DCB, you know, in places where it's not as adopted as others, though, is you know, maybe the under 15s or the under 18s, the ones that are not necessarily, when it comes to banking, the most adept. But because we have in these scenarios, quite a lot of these people have phone bills and phone subscriptions, the ability to add certain content subscriptions or content purchases to a phone bill is something that I think is going to be very applicable. But in that case, the onus is on the operators to make sure that the ecosystem is set up and they're ready to support it.
Thank you. One more interesting question and interesting topic is the RCS. Mm-hmm. So have you seen it picking up in a way to become relevant in digital content distribution and monetization? Do you think it could pick up significantly in the upcoming years?
I think when it comes to RCS and obviously the conversational commerce element, or just even the commerce element of it, doesn't necessarily need to be conversational, but we sort of have this idea of it growing quite quickly, and it does continue to grow, but maybe not to our expectations. I think it is ramping up. I think brands and enterprises are more happy to start exploring it now, because the value for them is obviously still increasing. But yeah, when it comes to the commerce element of it, it's the same sort of area. I think, you know, you could use conversational commerce with DCB and you know, using RCS as a platform. I think from RCS point of view that the ecosystem is there and it's ready to go. It's just increasing the number of people that use RCS and have access to it. Obviously, Apple is a big issue at the moment, but moving forward, yeah, I see no problems why brands and enterprises, who, by the way, is probably worth mentioning, from their point of view, it's about maximizing the number of channels that they can contact their customers with. RCS will certainly play a role in doing that, and I think they'll be more than happy to start investing in an ecosystem as it grows and becomes valuable to them to have.
And the privacy concerns that you mentioned and the regulations, do you think they will kind of impair this growth? What will happen to AI? There was a question on that as well. Do you think going further it will be able to, you know, collect and use the data in the right way? having the GDPR concerns in mind and everything? How do you see? Is there going to be a loophole? Kind of, what do you predict?
I think, yeah, obviously GDPR is going to be a huge issue for this. But they call it AI generative content. I think the initial stages, I think I did mention name and location. That's probably a bit of a jump too far, but maybe general location or general interests or things like that would be the first. But when it comes to the GDPR and regulation, it's more a case of as long as the person is not identifiable. So maybe not name is probably a really bad example there, but something that you can tailor a digital ad to somebody to get better click or to get their attention is something that we expect to sort of happen. And as long as it's not identifiable, then it won't break any GDPR. On the data security concerns, I think quite a lot of companies now in all sort of markets are investing in these data platforms for customers. I think it's a smart move. Not only do they get increased insight into what customers or consumers want, they're sort of showing that they are investing in the security of the data that they're using as well. So again, but this needs to translate into convincing the end user or the customer that their data is secure is the main priority.
Sure, thank you. One more question. I have to shoot further at you because we're getting more and more questions in. Do you think that the content will find its home more and more inside the super apps and wallets, or do you think they will, function standalone going forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's probably not a great answer, but it's going to be everywhere. I mean, it's a case of from a digital content provider's point of view, same with brands and enterprise, is essentially maximizing the reach of their content. If they can, they will go for multiple channels. Normally it's not legal issue, but some content provider want exclusive rights to broadcast or have that in their content library, which is something we'll see more and more. But from a point of view of the content itself, I would assume that we would probably see it happening more over the big apps itself and the big streaming providers. As I said, moving with the consolidation of content, especially the highly demanded content as well, will start moving towards there, and you'll start seeing these niche guys appear for small user bases, but simple return on investment. But areas like Netflix for video and Apple Music and Spotify for music will be well established and probably here to stay. Okay, clear.
And local content is an interesting topic that you mentioned. Do you see a trend of it growing in significance, or the ratio between the big global brands we all admire and talk about and the local content is kind of steady? What do you predict?
It's interesting because the term local content has actually gone over quite an evolution over the last few years. Local content used to mean it was sort of quite rooted in advertising, and you had local beacons that would send an advert to a phone if they came in contact with it. Then you had the rise of social media, apps like Snapchat and things like that, the way you could geotag, and that became a big thing. But local content in the future, that sort of moved from brands and enterprises with local beacons to social media with end users and consumers. I think it's going to shift back to the brands and the enterprises. They're the ones that are going to want to start promoting where the local content is. Geotagging is a big thing that we expect to happen over the next couple of years. The enterprises usage of geotagging will increase. And be able to say, we're in this location, or we're opening a new physical store in this location, those sorts of things, be more and more interesting. And the idea is that not when they geotag it and they have this information, then it sets up a immediate addressable user base to start using that local content for whatever they need it for, rather than just an end user just saying that we're in this location. So that's where I see local content going.
Okay, and before we wrap up, just one last question, and I have to mention the COVID-19 and the circumstances, because that's still an active topic, and I think still largely influences this digital market altogether. And at Centili, we love to talk about pivots. So combining the two, I know that COVID has largely shaped and influenced the digital arena, but what are some of the best and maybe biggest pivots that you've seen in terms of changing the business model as a response to COVID that were successful and kind of made an impact?
It's a very good question. I think I did touch on it briefly, but there was a massive decline in advertising during COVID, especially during March 2020. That's mainly because I think there was quite a lot of uncertainty with economic impact, what's going to happen, and the marketing budgets were sort of slashed. But the digital marketing side of things, everything that was left was basically pushed there because nobody was out, it was all pushed to either TV or online. And the idea is that what was left was all online. So we saw a small decrease in digital advertising spend. But as soon as they realised that people were still staying at home and there were small or minimal economic impacts during the first few months, everything sort of went straight back to advertising. And I think the big phrase that everyone used just in general is digital transformation with what happened with COVID, and it's accelerating. What you saw a few more things push towards the subscription model as well. I think it was less a case of content purchases or purchases for one-offs, certain things. It became much more, it seems like we might be in this for the long haul, let's go for a subscription, because firstly it's cheaper for the user, because the brand or enterprise, the service provider, can better manage recurring payments, which means they can pass on those savings to the customer. So they're the two big ones, the sort of the advertising shift in mentality and the continuing or the accelerated move to subscriptions.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for your time, for the whole presentation and for answering all our questions. We'll have to wrap it up just for the sake of time, but there are still a few questions pending, so we can maybe email them to you and get them answered later on and then publish them and share.
Yes, absolutely.
If anybody else has any further questions, just feel free to email us, and then we'll ask Sam to help us out and comment on those as well. And thank you again for being kind enough to let us record this session. So it will also be available as a video for everybody that's attended or didn't manage to. So I'm sure that we'll be getting back to it. So thank you, and thanks to Juniper Research for partnering with us today, for being here and spending time. And thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure to talk about this topic, and I'm sure we'll meet again and kind of continue the discussion as it's very relevant. So I wish you all a great rest of the day and hope to see you soon on another Elevate session. Thank you all.